And we are live. Hi, everyone. I'm Amrita, coming to you today with a very important and interesting conversation. And I've decided this is where all my worlds will meet because this is for the Health Collective, for and from the Health Collective, and for and from the Tap In Tribe, which is our new startup looking at, what women professionals really need in the workplace. And we've been talking a lot with some of you about leadership, about the skills we need. And I do think mental health is something we all need to talk about rather with each other all the time. So whether you're watching us live or you catch up on this later, a huge thanks for being here. We will be talking leadership, mental health, and everything in between with our incredible guest, Raj Mariawla, who I'm bringing on now from Mumbai. And Raj is actually a multi-hyphenate. Just going to check if we have the connection okay, just as we're starting. Let me just check on that. I think there's something freezing. Whether it's me or Raj, I will have to see. Give me 1 second as I get a little feedback. So we will give it 30 seconds to 45 seconds. Raj will be back with us in a minute. So I want to talk to you a little bit about why I thought this conversation would be interesting as we have more and more conversations. Whatever the hats we wear, and that's one of the things I wanted to talk to Raj about, juggling multiple identities as she does as well. There are certain key themes that keep coming back. Some of you know that at the Health Collective, we've been trying to kind of incubate, pollinate these conversations about mental health and mental illness from an India lens. We've been trying to make it easier to have these conversations. These are topics that we tend to instinctively shy away from or worry about, not know how to address. So that's been a mission that's been core to the Health Collective. And that's where our paths first crossed with the Mariwala Health Initiative. I think Raj is back now. So let me pop her back on screen. Hello. You're back.
Hello. Sorry for that.
Not at all. This is the perils of going live, even in our high-tech age.
Truly, truly.
So, firstly, Raj, thank you so much for joining us. I was just starting your intro. So I am very curious to know how you introduce yourself. So, of course, you're a director of the Mariwala Health Initiative. We know you from the work in that space, whether it's, supporting grassroots work on mental health, especially when it comes to those who are working with marginalized groups. We know you as a philanthropist, and you're also a feline and canine behaviorist. And a heads up to anyone who loves animals in the audience, because we've decided it's okay if our pets go nuts. Raj has significantly more in that space than I do. But how do you introduce yourself? And this concept of being a multi-hyphenate, what do you make of that?
Well, I think it's becoming more and more common. I mean, I know quite a few people who do a wide range of things, and I I, I think it's very interesting because it allows us to get very different parts of ourselves to what we do. And it's interesting that you ask how I introduce myself. I think initially when we started MHI, I did not mention anything about dog or cat training or behavior. I think maybe because people wouldn't take me seriously, possibly, or possibly the fact that I was already well known when it came to dogs and cats, and I didn't want people to see me any different where that was concerned. So I maintained a sort of boundary, and I would never speak about being a behaviorist in mental health spaces. But of course, in the dog and cat space, I started doing work on the mental health of those of us who work with animals. And so I did start speaking about mental health there. And now I make it a point to say, when I introduce myself, that I'm a canine and feline behaviorist. Honestly, I think for a lot of people, they just don't get it, what that could be, what that is. And so maybe it just gets kind of lost. But I do think it's, I find it important personally for myself to assert that, yes, I am this as well, and make of it what you will. If you think any less of the mental health work, well, that's on you.
Absolutely. But it's so interesting you say that. I've realized, till fairly recently, I've been apologetic because I feel like I've done so many things that I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah, I'm also a writer, or I'm also interested in this, or I used to be a journalist. And sometimes, I find I'm tailoring what I'm saying to the person. And now I'm like, you need to own it. You need to, if you want to be true to yourself. And I think that's the first thing that I've realized is important. It's not just about having your narrative be seamless, but even if it's not seamless, even if it's imperfect, even if there are different strands. So I love what you just said. I think it's important for us to just say who we are, and then it's on the other person to deal with it. They
Exactly.
react. Okay, so I want to start by asking you, and I've very grandly said talking leadership, mental health, and everything in between, but we have 25 minutes, so this is not going to be rapid fire. We'll have to see what we can get to. But let me
Sure,
start
sure.
with leadership, Raj. When it comes to leadership, and of course, we are going to talk a little bit about your lineage in a way, right? When we talk about corporate leadership, it's impossible to ignore. Folks you have in your own family who are icons, who other people look up to as well. But do you think at its core leadership is something that can be taught? Do you think it's something that can be taught wrong? Where do you think the emphasis needs to be on empathy and understanding when it comes to leadership? Can you share a little bit of your take on this?
Yeah. So, you're absolutely right. I do have the advantage of having observed my father, who is seen by many people as a leader. Um, and I do think that, there are things that I've definitely picked up from him very clearly. Uh, it could just be from observation, it could be from listening to him. And so I have had that privilege for sure. Do I think leadership can be taught? I think, I actually have quite a vexed relationship with the idea of leadership or even being a leader. Um, it makes me uncomfortable. I think largely because I think the models of leadership and who are leaders are extremely narrow, and almost all of them will follow a default. And that particular default, in the West, it would be a cis heterosexual, white, able bodied Christian male. In India, it would be able-bodied cis heterosexual Hindu upper caste male, and that's the paradigm. That's the kind of model, and there is very little divergence from it. Even if you look at some of the books that are written by cis heterosexual women leaders, such as I'm so bad. I've forgotten the name of I think the Facebook person who wrote a book. No, Sheryl Sandberg, whichever platform she was on, or for example, Indra Nui, even all of them are still very much following in the paradigm and having to make justifications for or talking about maybe how they've dealt with families as well when it doesn't come up otherwise in leadership. So the whole idea of leadership itself, I find, is a quite a, I mean, unidimensional. I don't think we have enough conversations around it. Uh, Except as of late, I do believe that Jacinda Ardern is quite a different leader, and it brings me to what you were asking about. I think, did you ask about empathy, if I'm not mistaken?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think she really kind of led the way in that, in terms of showing what an empathetic leader can look like, even in times of, I think, great upheaval, which is when New Zealand faced that violence during the pandemic, and then, of course, even while stepping down, to kind of show the vulnerability, which again is something that I think leaders really shy away from. And it's odd because ideally a leader should be transparent. And also, how would a leader expect anyone who works with them to come up to the leader and share if they themselves are not leading uh, in that sharing? So I think empathy is important. I don't think it can be taught. I know that, for example, for someone like me, I find it quite hard actually uh, to, I think, grapple with and express in the way that empathy is typically understood. And so I think actually a lot of work needs to be done around different types of leadership, be it models for how do leaders that are neurodivergent or leaders with invisible disabilities lead? How do leaders that have physical disabilities lead? How do trans leaders lead? I think we can get very different answers and ways of working on leadership. I just feel like we've not had the conversations, and most conversations around leadership tend to be extremely boringly mainstream, which is why I never read them.
The indictment, I thank you for your honesty, thank you for your honesty. I think you're absolutely right. There's only, recently, I'm even only recently hearing about this importance of empathy in leadership. It was never the playbook anyone went to, right? Even pre-pandemic, you would be considered like probably bad shit if you're talking about empathy and leadership. So I agree with you. I think we do see, and this is one of the challenges, and one of the reasons I wanted to set up this new startup is I think for a lot of, and speaking as, for women professionals, if you don't see, like when they say representation matters, and it's for all the identities you mentioned, when we don't see examples of people like us or people like any of the identities you mentioned doing well, thriving, not just surviving, because I think the other thing is the lip service that happens with some of these. It can be really, I feel like it puts an entire generation back. I don't know if you'd agree with that. And how important you think then allyship, peer support, mentorship, how important are all of these when it comes to the whole ecosystem?
I think they're critically important. I mean, I don't think that you're going to reach a leadership position without those, right? And let's face it, we're still very much uh, in that kind of space today. I was talking to someone the other day, and we were talking about the difference in the DEI kind of field versus the mental health at work field. And I think the consensus was that one has reached a little further when it comes to gender and DEI. But the fact of the matter remains, I mean, how many women leaders are there of, uh, different big companies or even at different managerial levels? It's just not there. I think one can still count off on their fingers the number of women CEOs, right? I hear a very familiar sound, and I'm very glad for it because hearing a dog always helps me smile. So, yeah.
She concurs, Raj. That is basically saying, yes, there are not enough women CEOs. Absolutely.
And so, I mean, that's just at that very level itself, you can tell that it's not gone far. So, we know that allyship has not gone far. We know that peer support is also, I think, lacking. And part of that, honestly, really is, I think, a key facet of leadership is how do you share power? And then how do you share power with people or those who are different from you? And then we can apply it to, okay, are you not cis heterosexual? Are you not able bodied? Whatever the marginalized identities are that I'm talking about. I think sharing power is one of the key aspects of leadership, and it's an important one.
And it's not something that seems to come easy when people are in power. I'm going to shift gears a little bit, and those of you who are watching, and again, if you catch up later, please feel free to put your comments and questions in. We will tackle them as best we can. We already have one from Sukanya. Huge thanks. Shifting gears, and before we really talk about mental health and some of the things you wish we were done with, let's say in 2024, just a few weeks to go now, what you wish would be done. But because we talked a little bit about privilege, and because I saw this lovely interview you had done with Vardarajan, who I don't know, but I love the interview, and we have since connected on LinkedIn because it's fantastically done. You basically went, he was starting to ask you about privilege, and you basically said, are you trying to ask me if I'm a nepo baby? And you took the sort of awkwardness out of the whole thing by just saying, I'll talk about it. So let me follow that lead and ask you, how do you position and how have you felt that, we talked a little bit about the lineage and, having Harsh Mariwala as your father, which we realize so many people have looked up to even today, right? For advice as an entrepreneur, how to run a successful business. How has that informed your outlook? How do you, come to terms with your privilege, and how do you try to, because when we look at the work the Mariwala Health Initiative is doing, for example, you're very clearly not doing certain things that, other HNIs and, let's say, without naming anyone, your approach is entirely different. So how does this all play in your mind? How is it, have you figured out your own identity within that?
Right. So I think again, for me, if I have to define, what it would be for me to be a good leader, I think understanding of your own power and reflexivity of your own privileges is absolutely critical. Okay, so which is why I told Vadraj, and yes, I'm a Nepo baby. And I think, guilt is quite a useless emotion when it comes to privilege. It's not going to help anyone, me, not anyone else. Um, Being self reflexive about it is, and then, at least for me personally, the idea is really is how am I going to deploy that privilege? There is no getting away from it. I mean, I could choose to say that, oh, I won't roam around in a car. I may not do XYZ things, and that's okay for some people. But there is no getting away from my privilege, and it's not just. I think the people tend to think that privilege is just money, but the of course, and money is an important part of it, but what has my privilege gotten me? I have access to education, to a certain type of language. I have access to certain types of networks. And uh, if I'm good at what I do, and if I'm a good leader, I will learn to deploy these privileges in order to, I think, engage with systems that honestly are unequal and kind of put me where I am in terms of my privilege, right? And the other thing I really want to say about privilege is that, of course, it's intersectional.
Hmm.
And it means that, yes, I have the privilege of wealth, caste, religion. I don't necessarily have the privilege of able bodiedness because I am a neurodivergent person. And what does that do? Does that mean that I may experience things in the same way as any other neurodivergent person? I will probably experience systems in a similar way. I will probably have different types of life experiences similar to other neurodivergent people. But here's the difference: my recourse, once I have faced something, is going to be vastly different. And of course, from the get go, I had the discourse and I had the language and I had the agency to deal with that neurodivergence. I had the agency to go to a psychiatrist, confident in the power that, I would not face violence from them. Have I faced violence from a psychiatrist? Yes. But my recourse was very different. All I had to do was I had to just shift psychiatrists. I had the ability to do it. I had the money to pay. So it is quite different in that sense. And so I do want to mention that bit about intersectionality of privilege. And I think it's very important, and I encourage this, I think, in a lot of my colleagues as well. Reflect on your privileges, and center them, because that's the only way that you're going to be able to engage with them and deploy them, if you are using a social justice lens in your work.
I like this. Deploy your privilege. I like it.
Hmm.
That makes a
Hmm.
lot of sense. Thank you. Literally writing it down. Thank you for that, and thank you for being so gracious about the question. It can be awkward, I think, when people try to bring it up themselves, or it can be, but you've just made it very easy for
No,
us
no,
to ask.
Nepo baby is such a funny term. I love it. So, yeah, yeah.
So, we're talking about neurodivergence, we're talking about empathy. When we talk about mental health, and I don't want to limit you just to mental health in the workplace, but I am curious because you all have done a report on mental health and leadership. You've worked across the board. There's so much advocacy work, but also awareness, and then the grassroots work we talked about. What are some things you want people who are watching this to be aware of? And can you share something from that report on leadership specifically?
Okay, so I'll tell you, we started looking at mental health at work in 2019. So this was pre-pandemic, and I think it was important for us at that time uh, to look at mental health at work for the organization, but also for the social sector, the civil society um, sector, because we felt like there were very limiting narratives around uh, what it is to work in civil society. You're giving up your life for something, then you should work 12 hours a day. How will people get what they need if you're not putting in that work? You're doing this for humanity. I mean, just very limiting narratives. And I think that was our kind of starting point. And soon I realized that actually I want to look at what the leaders of organizations do as well, uh, because that's going to have the most effect. And I do really believe this, and I'm switching now to like the for profit world. I do think that mental health at work has to be a C suite endeavor. Leaders have to lead from the front, they have to show vulnerability. I mean, they have to be honest and transparent, because otherwise, and they have to devote themselves to this particular topic, otherwise it's just not going to work. It can't just be an HR thing. So what we did at that point was to interview CEOs across a few different manufacturing sectors, other types of sectors, and speak to them about their mental health. And I think if I have to share my most kind of startling discovery was that I think CEOs are really scared of failing, letting down the people that they work for and other stakeholders. But more importantly, any type of coping or engaging with this anxiety and fear was all inward looking. So ranging from pushing yourself into exercise to listening only to music or to substance dependency, right? And that's a big red flag for me. So imagine if the leader of the organization themselves is unable to even speak to maybe their next in line. What does it say for the rest of the organization? And then how do we expect someone to go up to their line manager and talk about their mental health, right? So that's the study that we did, and then we looked at further at the mental health of corporate workspaces and what that could look like. And we broke it down into kind of three levels. One is what like the ecosystem looks like for a particular sector, like what would a banking sector employee face typically, or what would a manufacturing sector employee face typically, and look at it from an ecosystem lens. What are the demands of that particular sector? And then actually we encourage people to go and talk to their contemporaries in their own sectors. Think about unique life stressors for their workforce. How are you going to resolve them at an environment level? Such as, okay, I don't know, sitting at computers forever and after, what do you do? I mean, environment level, not mental health level. Because how are you going to change that system in itself to address distress that comes from how the system is structured? Okay. Then to look at the particular organization, its culture, its policies, what happens there, and see how those can be solved. And then finally, of course, at the individual level, that does is mental health at work accessible for an employee who is maybe a gay man who's come from a small town and who's ended up in a large city, right? Or is it accessible for someone who's autistic and has to go out drinking with colleagues at night? These are all part of I think looking at an individual level kind of employee, or leave all those, it could even just be someone who has caregiving responsibilities for maybe parents. Are they going to be able to put in, we heard about 70 hours a week quite recently. Are they going to be able to do that? and what in your organization can you change for that particular employee. So we kind of break it down like that. And of course, I
Mhm.
know I'm giving you very little kind of snapshots of each thing that we did, so feel free to ask some
Yeah.
more questions on this.
Well, I mean, one of them is I'm definitely going to look and go through the report, but this is really helpful. I think it's lovely to see some comments come in. Rishi, thank you. Rishi Jaitley saying that's a profound insight. Ari, the mental health of leaders themselves. Thanks for sharing. Preeta, who's going to join us in a couple of minutes, saying representation really matters, and everything you shared, Raj, was spot on. And Bhaskar, thank you for the hi. So, I do have a question. The 70 hours a week really threw everyone into a tizzy because for so many different reasons. But we had a question from Sukanya Sharma on this. Sukanya, huge thanks. Um, Saying we talk about work-life balance in that context, what level of detachment from work is healthy without feeling guilty about your work commitments? Because people often frown upon this and think one isn't dedicated enough to their work. And also, does this kind of detachment become difficult as you take up leadership roles?
So honestly, I'm going to answer this question with my behaviorist hat on. um, and for those who join the call later, I mean canine and feline behavior and dog and cat training. And this is something that I actually routinely speak to trainers and other animal care professionals about this particular topic. How do you switch off from work? How do you stop doing sessions? How do you draw that boundary when thinking that am I going to be the only person who's going to help this family hang on to their dog? Does this dog have to be put down? And it's in my power to solve, right? And it's a particular kind of concern for this field, but also I think very similarly for civil society, that what is going to happen if I stop this work right now? Are people not going to get life saving aid or very important aid? And I think the answer is really that I think you should be allowed to define your own dedication to your work. It's certainly not about time, neither is it about productivity.
Yeah,
Um, and I think so much of what we define as work, what we look at as progress, is growth related, is targets related. Um, when actually we need to take a step back and I think challenge that idea. Also, if you want to continue working, and I know again I'm going back to the canine behavior field, quite a few people have stopped this work, have dropped out, are contemplating never to do it again simply because of very high levels of burnout. And yes, there
yeah,
is definitely more emotional work involved in this than maybe, say, at, I don't know, computer programming. Though please don't shout at me, computer programming, programming people, it could be like very emotional and very deep for you. I completely respect that. But it's very important, I think, to define those boundaries and to have the organizational understanding. And
mm,
even as a leader, like when you sit down to do strategy or planning for the year,
yeah,
how you plan, how you look at maybe the workforce and their work planning, and how you indicate to people about how they are going to work is critical. And I'll give you another example. Every year we publish a journal called Reframe, and typically it is we have a call for submissions come out in I think May or even March, and we get stuff in, and it's out on in print by October. This year I was struggling so much with Reframe because I'm the editor, that I actually didn't publish anything up until uh, October, just even the call for submission. So, in one sense, I knew this was happening. I felt immense guilt about it. And my colleague, who's the CEO of MHI, said, Raj, I can see you're struggling with it. It's okay if we don't publish this year. And maybe good things can even come from that. I know that you can't do that with every corporate thing, but I do think it's very important to question ideas of dedication, of
Yeah.
productivity, of timing, uh, because of course work is not end all and be all, and that's a very I mean, I have nothing more to say to this other than to question this very system, because productivity, dedication are part of extremely neoliberal frameworks that need to be informed by other things, such as disability, such as other types of marginalizations.
Yeah, yeah. It's actually great that Rishi was Rishi's this incredible leader himself, and he's leading this program looking at bringing the humanities back to tech. And I a part of as a disclaimer, I'm a part of that fellowship. We're very curious about all of these facets. We have a couple more questions, and I want to bring Preeta in as well. Preeta is the co-founder of Tribe, a fantastic marketing professional herself. Preeta, thank you for joining us. We'll take Pratibha's question, and maybe you can, share your comments. And we'll try and get one last question in, though we are at time. We started with a few glitches. So, Raj, if it's okay with you, we'll take 2 or 3 more questions. Preeta, do you want to read Pratibha's question while I go attend to my dog?
Let me do that. Thank you so much for this conversation. It was really, really insightful. I do have one or two thoughts, but I'll come to it after I kind of read out Pratibha's question. So Pratibha asks, how much should we let our work define us? Is there a personality side to us that isn't because there is a personality and a side to us that isn't completely related to work. And what would your suggestions be, especially to the young people joining the workforce?
That's a great question. And I'll go back to the report that I referenced earlier, where I spoke about the mental health of CEOs. And if I'm not mistaken, maybe we didn't title it as such, but literally one of the other kind of startling insights was that the CEOs that we spoke to literally saw them being CEO as their identity. And if that is questioned, then everything else in their world gets shaken up. And I think that's a problem. We don't lead unidimensional lives, we don't lead single issue lives. um, and these are the same social systems that say that, okay, a working woman should be doing all the household stuff, similarly to which, for a man, he should be doing nothing else other than being the leader of his organization. I mean, we have to understand the system at play here and think about how to engage with it and challenge these norms. So I absolutely do not think that our work should define us. It should not be our sole identity marker. And I say this even as in most parties, I may start talking about dogs simply because it's an easy topic or people ask me questions and I'm always given flack for that. But it is, I think, very important to take a step back and not let that become our sole identity, simply because it then leads to, as we saw in the report, and you can look at the report, it has very far reaching consequences, I think, on empathy, vulnerability, and just being able to reach out to other people. And I think that's particularly dangerous when you feel like you have no other avenue open to you, if it's defined you so much.
Yeah.
And I think for young people, I know that a lot of uh, there's a lot of talk around Gen Z being like, yeah, my work life balance is important to me, etc. And I think that's a very, very good thing. I think for young people joining the workforce, um, I would look at, honestly, in terms of work not being an identity, I think hang on to all the things that people say that you'll grow out of this. I think for me, it's been important. People have said, oh, you're going to grow out of this, and you'll see when you become like older, don't do any of this stuff. I think it's important to hang on to those parts of you. And also, honestly, when it comes to workplaces and engaging with workplaces, speak to your workplace if there is no reasonable accommodation policy. Speak to your workplace about the different kinds of policies one has if one is to actually guilt free and without feeling fear maintain a balance between work and life, but definitely know the policies, because I'm all this sounds great, right? I'm talking emotional stuff, blah blah. All of that will fall flat on its face if I don't have workplace policies to back this up.
And I
That's
think
what.
with the identities, Preeta, we saw, with the mass layoffs that happened, that rocked Twitter 1.0, the tech industry. So many of us were so caught up. Also, we get our validation sometimes from what we do, right, Raj? I feel like the important thing is to know, like we said at the beginning, we have different. There are different things we're interested in, and come back to what your identity is outside of maybe your corporate job. One last question from me, Preeta, and then you wind us down, because I think we're going over time. If you had to, Raj, from everything you've shared with us today, what are some of the lessons you wish a younger you had known, including potentially this thing about not feeling that you couldn't share your full self, perhaps? Any lessons that you think, you wish a younger Raj had been just new?
I think for me, I wish a younger Raj, and I'm like, I don't think I'm a good leader. I'm actually scared of leadership, first of all. And so when I asked the MHI CEO to join, I said, like, you do the major leading, like, let me do all the stuff that I'm good at. You do all this. So I think the okayness to say that, um, the okayness to honestly, and I'm learning this, as we go, to be vulnerable. I think it's important for everyone, and I will say, I'm the first one to say that I'm not very good at it, to show that. So I do believe that is the kind of second thing. um, and in terms of the other lessons, a younger leaders, I think vulnerability, and I think being able to ask for help is, and then number three would be, I think, letting go of guilt. And I do think that leaders may have that. I mean, I had immense guilt over Reframe, which I just spoke about, and that's the only reason I pushed it out just now, because I just couldn't deal with it anymore, and it was keeping me up at night. um, so yeah,
Thank you.
yeah.
Thanks for sharing that, Preeta.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many points that resonated with me while the conversation was going along, and I mean, vulnerability, empathy, and in fact, questioning the leadership models. I think that's very, very important because I mean, not everyone, everyone's different. Everyone's unique in their own way, and you can't have frameworks which kind of try to herd people into something which they may not fit into. So, I mean, those are really, really interesting points. And I think the last few points about actually showing your vulnerability and the fact that don't let work define you, very strong. We've seen this over years, that we kind of forget about different things that we enjoyed when we were in college. When we start out, we have so many dreams and we want to do so many things, and as we go along, we kind of get pushed into work and kind of make that our life. There's a lot to learn from this, so thank you so much for this conversation. And Amrita, I think it was really amazing and a lot for us to learn and take away.
Thanks so much. Raj, did we just lose you in the last? Well, that means it is time. We really, really appreciate those of you who watch this later, those of you who sent your questions. Annie, we saw this right now. We'll put it to Raj and try and get you an answer on one of the channels. I think you're on YouTube. Great question. Preeta, thank you so much. Okay, Raj is back. Hold on. We can say bye nicely.
Sorry,
Hi.
my cat sat on my modem and destroyed the whole.
That was,
I think
I
that's
love
the
it.
best part.
Yeah, this is my favorite conversation. Raj, do you want to say bye? Do you want to take one last question, which Annie has put into YouTube? It's your call.
Yes. Yeah, I'll quickly say, we did look at mental health in civil society organizations. We have not looked at leadership in civil society organizations, unfortunately, but I think that would be a good thing to do. Fund crunch is definitely a stress factor, and if you look up our mental health at civil society, we actually ask donors, please ensure, as a responsible donor, please ensure that you don't leave your partners in the lurch.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that should be on the donor to look
Yeah.
at and solve, honestly. The lack of selfish, slow change for sure, but I mean, it is, I mean, I think transformative work and changing the social fabric can take forever. But if you look at our thing, there are many ways in which I think donors can address a lot of the systemic mental health issues that civil society organizations may face. But I would say a lot of the leadership has the same issues: fear of failure, but and even less power sharing than corporate. I'm very clear about this. Even less. People are sitting there for like 25 years and not moving, and this has to change.
From yeah, if it were to happen that quickly, that would be great, but I think we're going to be waiting a little bit for that. Raj, thank you so much. It's been such a fantastic conversation. I have made notes, but I really enjoyed listening to your vision also, and thank you for sharing some of your own personal sort of milestones along the way you look at the world and our place in it. I think this deploying our privilege and being aware of our privilege and being aware of so many intersectional issues that come up is something Preeta and I have been talking about. So we'll hopefully tap you in more as much as the Health Collective has done. Look forward to being in touch with you. Thank you so much. Thanks, Preeta, for joining us. And thank you all for your questions and your attention. And take care. Happy Diwali in advance.
Thank you both so much. Thanks, everyone. Take care.